So again, thank you very much. I guess I want to make just three quick preliminary comments before I kind of dive into the topic at hand. And that is, number one, once I'm done with the presentation, I would encourage everybody who feels comfortable and has the technological capacity to turn on the camera. I saw that about half the people are with cameras on, about half are off. It's much nicer to see faces than blank screens. So if you feel comfortable, that'll be great. The second thing is, this presentation is obviously not the usual, I guess, research presentation, and I would hope that we'll have much more of a conversation. And the third is, I'm happy to meet with people, to talk to you outside of the context of this presentation. If you want to talk more about anything that I said here or things that I haven't raised and you have questions about, I am definitely happy to talk about. So the topic, as you see in the slide, is in 20 minutes or so, tell everything you ever wanted to know about access to the US legal academia. And obviously there's much more that can be said, but let me try and talk about it. So the first thing that I want to highlight is that there are several, I would call them entry points into American legal academia. I want to briefly run through them, and then later on, I'm going to focus on some that I think will be more relevant and more interesting for most of the people on the call. One point of entry is what we would call visiting. Visiting falls again into several subcategories. Podium fills is, at least the American parlance, if you're already a professor in one university and another university has an empty slot in constitutional law, international law, and they need somebody to teach, they might call on you. There is no assumption here that they are looking to hire you. They just need you basically on a temporary basis. That is different from the look-see visit, in which you're basically invited precisely with the thought that they might be interested in luring you from your current institution and to come and visit. The third type of visit, and again, I can say much more about any of these if there are interest, but the third type of visit, which I'll come back to again later on, and which I think will be more interesting to most of you, is what we call VAP, or Visiting Assistant Professor. Just keep that in mind. I'll come back to that later. A second entry point is serving as an adjunct. Serving as an adjunct, basically you are hired to teach a specific course. No promise, no expectation of any sort of a permanent hire. It's exclusively focusing on teaching, relatively low pay. And the difference between that and the visitors that I mentioned earlier is that most of the adjuncts are usually lawyers, practicing lawyers that want to have a foot, if you will, in the door of academia. And so they would teach an elective course, because if you think about the size of the normal faculty, we cannot cover all the topics that our students are interested in. And so, we will take a lawyer who specializes in, say, international arbitration to teach a course on international arbitration. A third type of entry point, which again, I will say more later on, is legal research and writing. These visitors, which might be more relevant to many on the call, focusing normally on teaching first-year students. And again, I will say more about this later on. There are benefits, there are disadvantages to this. I'll run quickly through some of the benefits. It gives you a skill in reviewing student writings. It allows you to demonstrate your interest in finding an academic position. You might get an access to a very good library, which otherwise you might not have. You may have a chance to develop relationship with faculty and with faculty mentors. The disadvantage, obviously, is that legal research and writing is heavily focused on teaching, And so you might not have as much time to develop your own scholarship and your own writings. A fourth entry point is what are known as clinical faculty. And clinical faculty are mostly, or at least traditionally, faculty whose work is focused on actual cases with actual clients. These are normally experienced lawyers, and the emphasis here is mostly on practice. So at the University of Minnesota, we have something like 10 clinics, ranging from human rights clinics all the way to business and immigration law clinics. Again, this is a very particular type of position. The last two that I will mention are lateral hires, and lateral hires are professors from other law schools that are recruited laterally. So you're already a full professor or an associate professor, and you are recruited as such into another university. And the thing that I think will be obviously of most interest to most certainly of the younger folks on the call is a tenure-track entry level. And a tenure-track entry level, that is, I'm entering the process of being a permanent faculty in an American law school, and I'm on tenure track. I hope to get tenure. Now, I want to emphasize something here. In many countries, you're hired as an assistant professor, as an associate professor, you automatically have some sort of tenure. You might not be necessarily promoted, but you have a sort of tenure. This is not the case in the United States. If you enter, you start, and you enter as an assistant professor or as an associate professor without tenure, normally within the first 5-6 years of your hire, you will need to work toward getting tenure. It's not guaranteed that you will get tenure. It goes back to a faculty vote, and the faculty may decide, hopefully, to hire you permanently. And so rather than get a year-by-year or a 3-year contract, you will become tenured professor, and tenure means never having to say, oh, sorry. Or they might say, thank you very much, goodbye, but you do not meet our standards. And so I'm going to talk more about this tenure track position. Let me give you some information, some data points about the tenure track hires in the United States. And I have here the last 10 and a half years. In red are FAR forms. I'm going to talk more about those faculty appointments register forms. As you will see in the United States, we'll come back to that at the very end, the entry-level teaching market is basically nationally organized. It's nationally organized through the Association of American Law Schools, or the AALS. And the first thing that you need to do to the AALS is to fill that FAR form that will, it's a one-pager basically that tells prospective employers, that is prospective law schools, something about your education, your publications, your teaching preferences, your employment experience, and your references. The red line are the FAR forms, and as you see, it's the first round. There are 2 rounds in which potential candidates may fill in those forms, and those come very early in the process. The 2 deadlines are usually early in August and early in September of the year before the year you're supposed to start teaching. So if you want to start teaching in, say, September 2023, your FAR form needs to be in by August 2022, a year in advance. The red line here indicates the number of FAR forms, that is, of potential candidates interested in entering the teaching market in any given year. This is the first round. The numbers usually for the second round are significantly lower. But the thing that is really interesting to note is that if in 2011, over 660, actually 662 to be precise, by some accounts, we don't have exact data, but the best data that we have over 660 candidates applied for a teaching job. In 2021, the number fell to below 300. The number had a little bit of an uptick in 2022, but it's still about half of what it was 10 years ago. Similarly, if you look at the green line, that shows the number of people actually hired in those years. And again, to give you a sense, if in 2011, 660 potential candidates applied, actually the numbers were higher because there were 2 rounds of that. 155 were actually hired. Last year, of about 300 applications, actually 400 and some applications, 76 people were hired. Not only is the number of those hired going down, if you look at the blue line, which indicates the number of law schools actually doing hiring, that number also went down. If in 2011, about 100 schools were looking to hire new faculty, that number last year stood at about or just above 50. Now, what might explain that short decline in hiring? I think there's several things, and I just want to run through them quickly. If you note, in 2014, we see a real sharp decline and a trend that continues till this very day. So what might explain this? Well, one strong explanation comes from the numbers of applicants. This is students applying to law schools throughout the United States. And if you look at the numbers, you see a sharp drop starting in 2010. Not surprising if you think of the global recession between 2008 and 2010, we can easily understand why students are nervous about applying to law school. The trend didn't start. You might ask, so why is it the trend starting in 2010 and not 2008 and not 2009? It's a great question. I'm glad that you asked. And the reason is that even at the beginning of the recession, students who, or individuals who lost their jobs as a result of the recession, rather than face the perspective of, having a blank line on their CV, thought that they will go back to school to get maybe another degree. Not only that, the belief was that once you graduate from law school, you will get a lucrative job in a law firm, and that job will pay out quickly your student loans. And student loans in the United States are quite a hefty business. You pay a lot for going to law school. Soon enough, though, the realization hit that, in fact, law firms are paying significantly less as a result of the recession. Lawyers have been fired, and law firms tightened the jobs that they were offering candidates. And so it wasn't clear that you will get jobs. And as a result, since 2010, we start seeing a sharp decline. So if you look at 2004, we had over 100,000 candidates applying to law school throughout the United States. That number hits about 5,400, right, in 2015. The US law school market, whether you're a private university or a public university, is market driven. And so 2 things happen as a result of the recession. You have less students paying, you hire less professors. Not only that, but professors that are already in the system, as a result of the recession, are less willing, if you will, to leave their jobs, to retire. Here's another point that I want to emphasize. In the United States, there is no mandatory retirement age. If I want to, now that I am tenured and chair professor, I can basically teach till I'm 100 years old and beyond. There is no mandatory retirement age. And so if people stay at the end, if you will, of the pyramid, obviously it makes less positions available at the bottom of that pyramid. So that's some explanation to what's going on in the market. I want to focus, though, a little bit about the characteristics of the people that actually get positions in American law schools. And I want to draw your attention to three, I would call them resume building tools, and then we can talk more about some other characteristics of applicants. Degrees, and by degrees I mean advanced degrees, fellowships, and clerkships. I'm not going to talk much about clerkships, usually irrelevant. People coming from outside the United States. Here we are talking about judicial clerkships. Not very interesting. I want to say more about degrees and fellowships. And in fact, of the 76 people or so that were offered positions last year, that is in 2021, 82% some sort of fellowship, and about 68% had higher degrees. In fact, if we are looking at trends, all of the hires, all of the 76 people that were hired had at least one of those resume building tools, either advanced degree or fellowship or clerkship. Wasn't a single person hired that had none of them. And in fact, since we're talking about trends, since 2017, so in the last 5 years, between or around, I would say, 30% of all those hired by American law schools had all three, had clerkship, fellowships, and degrees, about 30%. Why is that? Why do we see that kind of shift? It's increased competitiveness. If the market has a lot of people vying for positions, you need to distinguish yourself from other competitors. So a first degree is not enough anymore. If you clerked, in fact, even if you clerked at the Supreme Court, which in the past used to be kind of, you clerked in the Supreme Court, here is a position waiting for you, even that is no longer sufficient. So I want to talk about those, the green circle, the advanced degrees, and the blue circle, the fellowships. There's another element that might come as a bit of a shock to you. In the United States system, you do not have to have a PhD or an SJD or a JSD or a Doctor of Philosophy in order to teach. You can teach with a JD, what they call a Juris Doctor, and it's not a doctor. The reason it's called Juris Doctor is because lawyers in the past were really upset that if you go to med school, you get an MD, a medical doctor, so they wanted something equivalent, hence the JD. It's not a doctorate as we think about it. So you can teach in the United States with a first degree in law. However, in practice, advanced degrees make you that more desirable to law schools. So I mentioned earlier that in 2021, there were 76 new hires. 31 of them had doctorate degrees. And those doctorate degrees, by the way, do not have to be only in law. In fact, of those 31, only 11 doctorates were in law. There were 7 in political science, 4 in philosophy, 3 in economics, 3 in history, 2 in business, 2 in psychology, and then some others that were kind of had only 1. The trend, in other words, is clear. Since 2017, again, in the last 5 years, between 40 to 50% of all hires, all kind of starting hires in law schools, had a doctorate degree, and that is up from about 15 to 27% in the previous 5 years. I would say, though, that while another degree is nice, you should be careful, and you should make sure that the main body of your work remains in law. So if I see somebody who has, I don't know what, a doctorate in psychology, and all their body of writing is in psychology, the immediate question that I will ask is, are you sure you want to teach in a law school? Maybe, going to the psychology department is more up your alley. I want to say a word about LLM. value of getting an LLM or an SJD, Science of Jurisprudence Doctor, or JSD, Juridical Science Doctor, as it is known in the United States. And I would suggest to you that there is quite a significant advantage for people coming outside the United States of having those degrees. First of all, it allows you, if you will, to Americanize. If you have a degree, including a doctorate, from a school outside the United States, American schools will say, okay, that's very nice, but can you actually teach here? You might be a luxury hire for us, but we might need somebody who will teach contracts or criminal law, right? Or corporations. Can you do this? And if you had your degrees outside of the United States, we might be suspicious of your capacity of doing this. In fact, of the 76 hires in 2021, only 6 received their law degrees from non-American universities. Everybody else had either a JD, a first degree in law, or an LLM, or a master's, or a PhD, SJD, doctorate fill in the United States. The other advantage of having an LLM is it gives you a period in which you have another opportunity to write, research, to check out the culture. Do I actually like the American culture? Do I actually want to stay in this place? Is that something that I want to do? Now, you want to think carefully about this because obviously it is time and money. But I can tell you that at least 2 people on this call went that route. I came to the United States with an LLB from Israel. I did my LLM and SJD at Harvard Law School in order to get my doctorate. And I know that Professor Peters also got her LLM after she already had a doctorate, if I'm correct, in Germany, came to Harvard to do her LLM. So I think that this is something that you should keep in mind. A word about fellowships. Remember, I said that there is the advanced degrees circle, and there is the blue part of the Venn diagram that is about fellowships. And here I would point to you to at least 5 types of fellowships. The first type is a visiting scholar or a visiting researcher. Basically, you're visiting in an American law school. Usually, it is unpaid. Usually, there are some that are paid. They won't be paid a lot. Again, remember, the United States is quite expensive to live in, but these are unpaid. You can be affiliated with a specific program or a specific center in a law school. We have, for example, a human rights center at the University of Minnesota. We have a business law center. So you can be affiliated with those. By the way, it doesn't have to be only law schools. There are some programs that are law and might not reside in a law school, but still might give you the opportunity to at least sense, to at least feel what it is to be involved in American academia. The second type of fellowship or visit is the one that I mentioned earlier in my first slide, and that is the visiting assistant professor. Visiting assistant professor normally is a position for 1 or 2 years, and if it's relevant to you, I would strongly recommend taking it for 2 rather than 1. It gives you an opportunity to write. It gives you an opportunity to get teaching experience. We at Minnesota just hired a VAP who's going to be with us for 2 or maybe 3 years, and who's going to teach, among other things, constitutional law. This is a very accomplished person, was a student of mine, then went on to clerk, including at the Supreme Court. And one additional thing is that this program allows you to get some sort of mentoring from faculty and to get to know faculty, right? So the VAP program, while you are not fully permanently part of the faculty, is as close maybe as you can get to that. I mentioned earlier the legal research and writing. Many law schools, the University of Chicago has what they call the Bigelow Fellowship. Harvard Law School has the Clemenko Fellowship. These are designed for people who are interested in going into academia, And the way that they do this is they give them a fellowship and have them involved in legal research and writing. You will teach, usually first years, how to write legal memos, how to think like lawyers. That is, again, especially for somebody not coming from the American system, may be a good way of an introduction, if you will, to the American system while getting to know the system from within. Some schools have clinical teaching fellowship. I'll just point to you if you want to get a sense of that. If you look at Yale Law School, they have what is known as the Robert M. Cover, after a very famous legal scholar, fellowship in public interest law. This is an example of a fellowship that is geared to this sort of clinical teaching. Some schools have specialized area teaching. Again, an example, NYU has a fellowship that is geared to those who are interested in teaching or researching legal history. If that's your passion, then you should definitely look at it. And finally, there are general scholarships. I was on a Fulbright scholarship. I then received the British Academy Award. So these are awards and grants and scholarships that you can obviously use when you are trying to access the American market. Let me point out to some other considerations, and if we have more time, I'll say more about the process, but if not, that's fine as well. Let me first of all talk quickly about some considerations that candidates need to think about, and then some considerations that law schools, the future employers, are looking at. The first thing, and I would say the most important thing, publish, publish, publish. Several things here. When I'm saying publish, 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 don't get the sense out that I need to have either a book or at least 10 publications under my belt, or else there's no way I will get a position in the United States. No. At least one publication is important. It can be an article. It can be a good article. There is a special different topic on how to publish in American law journals. This is for a separate conversation. All I would say, which again is shocking to many in Europe, US law journals, including the leading law journals, the Yale Law Journal, the Harvard Law Journal, are all student edited, not peer reviewed. This is shocking, rightfully shocking, but that's what it is, right? It is student edited. The second thing that every law school is going to ask you is your research agenda. I'm not talking here about, for the next 25 years, I want to do. You need to get a sense of what you want to do in the next 2, 3, maybe 5 years. And you need to have a good sense. So just general terminology might not be enough. You want to show a progression. We want to see a trajectory. We want to see that this is a candidate who, if we are spending our precious resources on hiring, will actually become a good scholar. Journal membership, I put there just as a note, it's not as important as it used to be. It used to be that if while doing your first degree in law, you were a member of the editorial board of your law school's journal, that was a very important point. It's no longer that important point. It's helpful, but it's not critical. And the last thing that you need to think about is recommendations, right? Who's going to recommend me? And specifically, I would say, and are they willing to pick up the phone or the email and actually write to schools? Or will they just write a general letter of recommendation? From the law school's perspective, the employer's perspective, I want to highlight 3 things. The first thing is the law school looking for what we call the best athlete? Are we looking at subject matter needs? Best athlete is basically, we are looking at all the candidates, everybody that put in that FAR form that I talked about earlier, and we are trying to identify the best of the best. Who is going to be the shining star in academia and to try and to recruit them? is very nice, but it might not be what in the real life we need. If I have a need for 2 professors of constitutional law, 2 professors of international law, then I might not be that choosy. So I need to find somebody that will plug the hole. Why is that important? Why am I spending this time? Because if you are looking at the FAR form that I mentioned earlier, one of the things that you need to do on the FAR form is write which areas, what topics are you willing to teach. Now, on the one hand, I'm going to say to you, don't write, I'm willing to teach whatever you need me. I can tell you, I will never teach civil procedure. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but I will not teach civil procedure. But you want to be a bit flexible. Even if your passion is international law and only international law, don't just confine yourself to international law. And the reason is that those forms are searchable. And many law schools, I can tell you, for example, this year, we were looking for people to plug in a hole that we have in labor law. And our appointments committee took the forms and basically ran a search for people willing to teach labor law. If you're not there, we might miss you completely, even if you're wonderful. So I'm not saying write everything, but don't be overly narrow in what you're willing to teach. Be flexible. The second thing that I will mention is, are we looking to hire somebody on the doctrinal side or a clinical hiring? And while those distinctions are blurring in some schools, not all, it's still a valid distinction. Am I looking for somebody whose main contribution, other than teaching obviously, is going to be research, the doctrinal side, or am I looking for somebody who's going to do the cases, dealing with clients, while also teaching classes, that is the clinical side? Both of these are highly valuable, and students value both of them. But you need to think about what is it, what's your strongest, in a sense, application that you can put forward. The third thing that I will put forward, and it's kind of out of your hands, but law schools in the United States are giving a lot of attention to, is diversity. And diversity can be gender diversity. Diversity can be racial diversity. Unfortunately, I would say less kind of things such as intellectual or ideological diversity, which are also important. So again, if you have any particular or unique story that will put you in a unique perspective on the diversity element, this is something definitely that you want to put out. I'm not sure how much time I have, if I have more, so I can also stop here and get questions. If not, I'm happy to talk about the process. But why don't I stop sharing just to see if there are questions or not?